pianist and composer Arsenti Caritono. Arsenti, welcome.
There's only one thing that saved me from all my failures, and that is music. Music is this kind of hub where you just connect to. You are not inventing really anything. You are just shuffling things the right way. What I found as a challenge is how do I freeze that moment to understand how to write, how to communicate my ideas to some other performer.
Improvisation. Is this a course that you offer?
You look at Beethoven, of Mozart, of Liszt, Chopin, Brahms, Bach, you name it. They were great improvisers. I don't think Liszt would play his own composition exactly the same way as he has written it on the page.
You build this bridges, a course that is called the active listening, that one can manipulate their brain in order to comprehend and to listen to certain specific things.
They are all improvisers, absolute great improvisers.
Don't forget that all the doctors that you have is also a result of universities want to make money. They have become individual businesses and not educational spots.
I'm going more for beauty, like a sunflower. I turn towards the sun, towards the more melodic content in my music.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. Our show is supported by your decision to give the gift offered by UR Music and Arts shop this holiday season. Our Christmas package costs €40 or $47 plus shipping and can be purchased directly on our website. We also have available now for Europe and the United States of America our coffee all ready to be shipped out. So there it is. The ad, all you have to do is click add to cart. There's the coffee that's all ready. Just add to cart and go to checkout. And there we have it. That's easy. So we thank you very much for your generous support of our show. Tonight, our featured guest is economist and economic historian, Dr. Niall Kishtainy, who joins us from London, England. Niall spent the first part of his career as a British civil servant, working as an analyst and researcher of Middle Eastern affairs, and then as an economic advisor to development agencies in Ethiopia, Albania, and the Palestinian territories. Niall then pursued a career in academia, where he taught courses in economics and economic history at the London School of Economics and the University of Warwick. From the onset of the 2007 financial crisis, Niall started to question if he might be able to use his career to present the broader public with what he was convinced economics had been used for in the past: the solving of problems that intimately affect each of us. That question eventually resulted in the 2017 publication of A Little History of Economics by Yale University Press. Perhaps it is ironic that the broader public that Niall's book addressed included the Western political elite. It immediately received a glowing review in Foreign Affairs magazine. The magazine's reviewer of new publications about economics wrote, quote, "This engaging book provides a non-technical introduction to economic concepts by highlighting the innovations of leading thinkers from ancient Greece to modern times, from Plato to Aristotle, to Tony Atkinson and Thomas Piketty. It ingeniously links key concepts from economics, not just to government policies and the workings of big corporations, but also to everyday family life and the day-to-day functioning of small companies. Reading this book is a pleasurable and easy way to become familiar with important economic ideas such as comparative advantage, unemployment, aggregate demand, inflation, and income inequality, end quote. Niall joins us tonight to speak about the important role that economics can play in each of our lives and why each of us can and should become an economist. Also joining us tonight is Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California and Professor Niels Moos, Director of the Opera Masters Program at the Music and Arts University of the city of Vienna. At the end of the show, Juan Carlos Echeverry will send us a missive from the Echeverry family coffee farm near the city of Pereira, Colombia. Niall, welcome.
Thanks, Simeon. Really nice to be here tonight.
Niall, so tell us just exactly, give us a little background about you, your family, and how it is that you got into economics, why that interests you, and why that still interests you today.
Sure. I suppose where it started from was, an interest in philosophy. I suppose as a teenager, I started reading books like History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. I got interested in that field, and then from there started to get curious about sort of social theory and politics, that come out of philosophy, and then from that quickly into the sort of what are the material underpinnings of a good society, of politics and so on, and that really quickly took me into economics, and these really big questions of human welfare and well-being that economics addresses.
Niall, so how is it that actually you became interested in those questions? Is that what you talk about during breakfast every day with your family?
No, we didn't. I guess just as a teenager, just at school, and just I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed ideas, and yeah, somehow I got interested in philosophy, and that then sort of led to the next thing, and by that sort of a progression, if you like. Which I think it's quite, in a way, it's got a natural progression, because economics, in a way, it came out of philosophy. There were no professional economists until well into the 19th century. People who wrote economics were philosophers. So in a way, it comes out of that broad humanities sort of context. So I suppose that's where it came from for me. It wasn't so much about wanting to know about the stock market or finance. It was more these sort of big sort of social questions that's really what was motivating me.
Understood. And so you said even when you were a young man, this was very interesting to you, these serious topics of large consequence. Tell us about your parents. Are they economists?
No, my father, who comes from Iraq, he was a writer, and so he and writing actually about politics and social issues. And my mother used to work with him, helping him sort of edit some of his work and helping him with translations that he was making. So he wrote mainly in Arabic and also in English. So I guess in the house there was a sense of people being politically engaged and culturally engaged, and that their work was sort of connected with that. And it was a place where sort of intellectual activity and cultural activity was very much sort of prized. So yeah, I guess it was a good environment to start.
Fantastic. And so the family generally, you were talking always exchanging big ideas, yeah,
I'm not sure it was quite, it wasn't sort of rammed down my throat, if you like. But it was sort of in the background. Yeah, certainly there was sort of political discussions, but I wouldn't describe it as some sort of hot house that was constantly sort of fizzing with sort of philosophical debate. It wasn't quite like that. It was a relatively sort of a regular household, but certainly with a sort of context of cultural and political engagement, I would say. Yeah.
And so tell us about these first experiences you had in the British civil service, when this was kind of, because like you said, so your parents were very aware of their surroundings, aware of how we all interact with each other and affect each other. How was it when you got into the real world?
Yeah, well, I guess, so, I studied economics at university, and I did have some hankerings at that point to go into academia. It didn't quite work out that first time round, and so I went in and got a policy job. And the thing with economics is that it's yes, it's an academic subject, but it's obviously very applicable in a lot of practical contexts. So, you know, policy work and government work, you know, huge demand for economists. Yeah, I mean, it helped me see how economics works at the sort of sharp end when you're outside those models, those beautiful, serene, pristine mathematical models that you study in the academic context, that actually when you get into a policy context, things are much messier, you know, and it's quite a different sort of world, and the skills needed to really sort of apply those models in a useful way in a very practical, fast-moving policy context. It's quite, you know, it's a real skill, and it's not one that you're necessarily taught in an academic context. It's something you have to kind of get your hands dirty with, I think.
So when you talk about
great experience, yeah.
When you talk about working in Ethiopia, Albania, and the Palestinian territories in the 1990s,
Yeah.
I get the impression you could see for yourself what happens when economies were not working properly.
That's right. You see what's happening, and you also see the complexity of that and how much that's to do with politics and sort of deep social questions. And actually, then turning the lens back onto economics, how a lot of the standard economics that you learn in college isn't very good at actually dealing with a lot of that stuff. And we can talk, maybe we'll get onto this topic a bit later on, but the problem of abstraction, which is what economics is, this very kind of abstract set of tools, is this sort of type of thinking. And when that's applied to, I don't know, the economy of Ethiopia, without thinking about the sort of broader social context, you get into problems. So I think it started to give me a more sort of critical eye, a more critical attitude to economics working in those places, I think. Because economics doesn't have a great record in a lot of those countries in terms of policy making.
And so what was it like when you would speak with your colleagues in the Foreign Service? And then what was it like when you would speak with the everyday citizens in those countries? Did they understand economics in a better way or in a worse way than you did, or in a different way?
I think in a different way. I mean, actually, the work that I was doing was very much sort of, you know, it wasn't very grassroots. I wasn't going out doing field work, you know, in agricultural areas. I was very much the kind of economist who sits in the capital city and talks to central bankers. That sort of which is actually what a lot of economists do. I mean, I think, yeah, you know, the everyday person would probably think about things in quite a different way to what they'd be thinking about it, much more in terms of sort of politics and power and those sorts of things, which are really, you know, really important things. And often economists have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to those types of things. But they're the kinds of things that, you know, ordinary people in those countries are very much aware of, how power works and how politics works and how that affects the economy.
So generally speaking, in those countries, had you gone out and spoken with some of those citizens, do you believe they probably wouldn't trust you very much because they don't trust the political system?
Quite possibly, yeah, quite possibly. I mean, they are certainly places where the political system doesn't work very well, and it doesn't tend to be very responsive to what citizens want. So yeah, you know, I think there'd be a lot of sort of hopelessness when it comes to thinking about the bureaucracy and so on.
Understood. That
Yeah.
makes it tough for policy making.
Yeah.
So tell us now, you got back and then you finished your PhD in the history of economics, and it kind of, you looked into this social aspect, like you said, of how economics affects everyday people. Tell us about that and how you got to this idea of writing a little history of economics.
Yeah, so when I went and did a PhD, I did all the sort of standard syllabus of the sort of mathematical stuff that you study when you do economics. But then I did my thesis on an economic history topic, which was much more interdisciplinary. So it was really looking at historical trends. It was looking at things a lot more broadly. And then I was teaching economic history courses as well, which are quite different from teaching straight economics courses. So that yeah, in a way that got me into a sort of slightly broader field than, you know, I wasn't just doing very mathematical, highly specialized stuff. I was thinking about sort of big historical processes. I found that really, really interesting. And then I suppose that was part of a process that got me. I'd always been interested in writing and had sort of dabbled a bit with writing in the past. I did work as a journalist for a few years at one point, and then started thinking, how do I kind of talk about this stuff using narrative, using story, things that actually economics doesn't normally use. It tends to express itself in terms of these sort of very crystalline, abstract models. So how do I use storytelling to communicate that? And that was the sort of a start of a process, I guess.
And one part of your storytelling that strikes me particularly is the use of going into individual personalities of economists.
Yes.
Is that how did you get into that? And is that just the entryway, like you said, that you present these people as flawed individuals who have happiness, who have sadness? Is that one way that you connect people to economics, or is that a personal joy that you?
Yeah,
like
I mean, well,
about?
it's partly I find that I find biography and sort of narrative writing fascinating, and it's what I'm pursuing at the moment. But yes, I mean, there was a reason. Yeah, the reason why I was really enthusiastic about doing this way is that economics, particularly the introductory books that you read, and also the way that people study it at college, it's never presented as a kind of historical story where there were different thinkers, who emerged out of different historical contexts and had different interests and different personalities, and then created these theories. It's always presented as it's actually taught a bit like the field of engineering, where you've got a set of highly developed tools, usually mathematical, that you then apply, and there's never much of a sense of where did these actually come from, who invented them, why are we using this particular set of tools. There were a whole other set of tools that maybe we've forgotten about in the past. It was actually, if you look at economic thought historically, it's incredibly diverse in terms of how people did things. So yes, it was about I think it was about communicating that diversity, and part of doing that was connecting it to the people that actually brought these different theories, from Adam Smith through to Marx, through to Keynes, and then ones that people don't know so much about, like Veblen and even François Quenet in the 18th century in France. So looking at these people as individuals who were dealing with the problems that they faced in their societies, I think that's a sort of fascinating way to talk about economics, and it's not one that's done very much. I mean, in other disciplines, that's taken for granted. If you read a history of philosophy book or something, so this is something that really wasn't available for people coming at the subject for the first time.
So this seems like a good time to bring in Professor LINO Rivera of St. Mary's College of California, where he comes from, the School of Liberal Arts. It's quite normal to speak about people and their influence and their agency, like Niall's saying, which is uncommon in textbooks on economics. LINO?
Hello, Niall. It's a pleasure that we can have a conversation with you tonight. I am a musician and I'm a professor of music here at my college. And I can remember during my graduate studies that one of my professors told me, we are doing a big disservice to our students because we keep, just like in the vein of what you're saying, we teach teaching our students the basic rudiments of music, how to perform, how to analyze the great works of the great composers. But the disservice that we do is that we do not teach economics. We do not teach our students how to make a living, and after graduation, well, you are on your own to swim, and either you drown or you survive the world out there. So in that sense, my comment and question, I guess, is that how do we become economists in our own sense? How do we manage economics? Just like what you said, each one of us must be economists in our own selves.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one way of, I mean, I guess one thing that I was trying to do with this book, there's often a very extreme attitude towards economists and economics. So sometimes people, oh, it's this incredibly arcane, technical, difficult subject. Let's leave it to those sort of experts out there. On the other hand, there's quite a lot of cynicism about economics, particularly after the financial crisis and the distrust of experts under populism. Oh, all these, you know, these economists, what do they know, and all that sort of attitude. And I'm trying to sort of bring people into the sort of intermediate position and say, look, you can be assertive in your dealings with economic ideas. I mean, one thing is to, you know, there are good, not that I'm trying to plug my book too much, but my book is trying to communicate these ideas to people in a user-friendly way. So reading books like that, my book, other people's books, the ideas are out there, presented in a digestible way. Economic ideas are usually not, underneath all the maths and the jargon, are not usually that, I mean, you know, they are comprehensible, even if you haven't studied, you know, in the university, you know, economics courses or whatever. So I guess my advice is, you know, don't be too daunted by economists. You know, it is something that we can all engage with, and I think we need to engage with.
Wonderful. Moving on, the next important question we have: where does economics come from, and what does it mean?
I mean, so going back to sort of my earlier comments about what, you know, why I got involved, what made me keep with it. It's really looking at these really, you know, the biggest questions of human well-being, and specifically the material basis for that well-being. And that's a huge topic and a huge set of questions. So how do people get the food that they need to survive, the medicine that they need? How do we deal with things like mass unemployment? So these really inequality, and today, you know, the question of climate change. These are really big questions of human welfare and human existence, and that's what economics tries to tackle. So I mean, there are, again, if you the book looking at this thing historically, there's a diverse set of ways of sort of getting into that question. So the material basis for human flourishing, that's an extremely broad kind of notion of economics. A modern economist would see it in a much narrower set of questions that might come underneath that.
Niall, and will you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of modern economics with Adam Smith?
So exactly. So I mean, a lot of histories of economics would start with Adam Smith. They would say he's the first sort of modern economist, and often that's where they start. And there's some quite good reasons for doing that, because Adam Smith was writing on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. So when this capitalist economy was really starting to burgeon, you know, markets developing, industries, commerce, and, you know, that's what a lot of economics is about. So it's looking at that broad question of, okay, what is the material basis of human flourishing within that kind of context? So that's sort of one important staging post. But I go back a lot further. I mean, I go back to the ancient Greeks, who were not talking about economics in quite the way that we do today, but were still thinking about, you know, what is the material basis of a good life? So they'd be coming at it in terms of, you know, how does commercial life fit into being a good citizen, and how does it, you know, fit into sort of fostering the virtues, the set of virtues that you need to be a good person, a good citizen? How does money making and buying and selling fit into that? That's quite different to sort of the modern standard way of looking at economics.
Niall, and so the the word economics comes from Greek, right? And
that's right. That's right. So it means household management of the household. So basically, you know, you imagine the Greek citizen on his estate, cultivating some crops for the household and then selling a bit, selling some of it in the market. It's how do you manage that whole process? So it starts with the household. Actually, household management is what it originally means. But of course, now it's a much broader thing. It's how do you manage an entire economy of households and businesses.
But would you say that today it's that much different for most of us who also have households and who we also have to do our own planning?
We do. I mean, there's a question of course, the household is sometimes it is one economist had likened it to a little miniature factory where inputs go out and outputs get produced, meals and so on. But I mean, economics, you've got to be actually there is a bit of a fallacy that sometimes crops up when people talk about economics, which is managing an economy is just like managing a household. But actually, sure, the household is an important unit of the economy, but when you scale up and combine all those households together and all those businesses together, you get this very big complex system that functions in a very different way. So the problem that the government has to face in terms of managing an economy is very, very different to what a household is facing. There's a fallacy of composition in saying the whole economy is the same as a household. Sure, the household is a really important unit of the economy, but the economy as a whole, it's a more complex kind of system with different types of behavior going on.
Understood. And for our participants who do not really have a good idea about what economics is, can you explain kind of some of the key elements of economic thought today?
I mean, I guess, it's looking at, so an economy, within that economy, you've got the households who consume things, so who buy stuff, so a load of consumers. They also, they work, so they supply labor, so they have jobs. There are firms producing things, and then there's interchange, there's exchange between all these units. And what's the result of all that? Well, people end up with a certain amount of wealth, income, and goods that they consume. And that, how does that happen? And is the result of all that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are there, ethical problems? Why is it that one set of people seem to have so much more than others? How that whole system shakes out and what the result of that is on human welfare, on human well-being. That's basically what economics is about. And then there are a whole kind of raft of theories that sort of go into more detail about those different components. But I guess that's what economics is.
Can you explain to us a little bit about the idea of externalities?
Yeah. So there's a chapter in the book about this. So this came from a Cambridge professor in the 30s called Arthur Pigou. The idea of externalities. So it's very simple, really. It's just the idea that an externality is something where it's something that has an impact on someone, but that isn't reflected in any price. Okay, so that a classic example, I think that the example I give in the book is, okay, you've got a paint factory producing paint. It produces some byproduct of the paint that it dumps into a river. Say there's not great environmental regulation in this hypothetical country, and then the pollutant flows downstream to where there's a fishery, and that kills some of the fish, so that reduces the output of the fishery. Now, basically, the problem there is that pollution has not been factored into anyone's sort of market calculation, because they can just throw it away as if it's rubbish. So the paint factory doesn't consider the broader social cost of its production. So if you look at if the economy is, the paint factory and this fishery, what you get is basically socially too much paint is produced. They're looking at their private benefits and costs. They're not looking at that broader social cost that comes from releasing the pollution into the river. You can also get positive externalities. So it might be that a firm does some research into a new kind of plastic, and that plastic can then they're using it to make, I don't know, new kinds of lunchboxes or something. But then that plastic can actually be used in other applications by other firms. So they get an economic benefit. But that firm, when it's doing its research, it doesn't think about what those broader benefits would be. It only looks at its own bottom line. And the problem is that those broader benefits are not reflected in any price. Okay, now the biggest externality that we face today is the emission of carbon. That's a massive externality. So if I drive my car or demand some electricity, I'm thinking about my own private benefits and costs. I'm not, or it's almost impossible to sort of think, okay, but what's the longer term cost on a farmer in Brazil who'll get an extra increment in weather problems, weather fluctuations, you see. So this is the big externality that we're having to deal with now. So it's a very standard bit of economics. How do you deal with externalities? There are various tools that you can use. You can use taxes and subsidies and so on. But yeah, a very important sort of concept in economics, the externality.
Fantastic, thank you. Professor Lino Rivera has another question.
Yes, thank you. My question basically is there a fairness regulator that's embedded in any economic system? The reason why I posed this question is, especially during this pandemic, the richest of the richest made millions of dollars. And while the people who are earning minimum wage, they're losing their jobs. The small businesses are losing their businesses.
Yeah.
There's something that is embedded in any economic system that makes it, that has a regulator for fairness.
I mean, such a fundamental, brilliant question. I mean, so this gets to the heart of this key distinction in economics that's made between efficiency and fairness, or efficiency and equity. And so often what economists have been accused of, this kind of tight mathematical theory, it really focuses on efficiency. So our resources being wasted, basically. And that's sort of fine up to a point, but the problem is you can have very efficient outcomes that are extremely unequal. And so ultimately what's that saying is that economics, really as it should be, economics is, yes, it's what they call a positive discipline that looks for laws that are, in the way that a physicist would, but it's also a normative discipline that should be about ethics, morality, what kind of society do we want to live in, what is fairness, all these kinds of things. Now, there is certainly no fairness regulator. I mean, the fairness regulator is the government and the voters who have kind of political preferences over things. One critique of economics is that it's not been, it's neglected that kind of broader fairness question. So this gets us into debates about neoliberalism and what neoliberalism is and how economics was connected to that. Really kind of the central idea being the efficiency of markets, that markets are this fantastic algorithm that allocate everything beautifully. But there's this fairness problem. And the older economists, so that the Greek, the ancient Greeks, and even Adam Smith, they saw economics much more as this kind of holistic discipline that wasn't just about these very narrow questions to do with commerce and markets. It was a much broader sort of philosophical, ethical endeavor. You couldn't separate these ethical fairness questions from the sort of narrow, this division between the economic and social wouldn't have been recognized by, Adam Smith and Karl Marx. And this is only something that sort of happened over the 19th century, when economics became much more mathematical and those kinds of philosophical, ethical questions started to be sort of disembedded from it. So I agree with you. I mean, the fairness question is absolutely critical. And now, actually, I would say that the fairness, in the end, you can't even separate them, because if you look at something like inequality, I think rising inequality is unfair, it's wrong, but I think it also has really serious economic implications. It probably will start to make the economy less efficient, but precisely because so many people are not able to flourish fully and therefore contribute what they're able to contribute, because they are, having to deal with all these kind of, these terrible sort of constraints and problems of poverty and so on, and struggling to sort of make a living. So actually, I think inequality can then actually have negative feedback on the economy itself. So they're intermeshed. They're absolutely connected.
Okay, I have a follow-up question right there, Niall. Coming out of the pandemic, and we are hoping that we're going to get out of this pandemic, we know that lots of people lost their jobs, businesses bankrupt, they can't get back. How do you see ourselves getting out of this pandemic, and will there be a new system, a new modification to the economic systems that we have in place?
I mean, we've got some history to go on here, and we've got some tools to support the economy. I mean, so essentially the government stepping, I mean, this is the really unprecedented situation where we voluntarily sort of shut down all our economies. So the government certainly has to step in and start, I mean, essentially underwriting bits of the economy and starting to build demand again and starting to sort of build confidence again over the next year or so, as you know, as the health, hopefully the health crisis starts to abate with vaccination and so on. So it's partly a sort of short-term massive support to the economy from the government to try and save what jobs there are. But I also see, I mean, the other big policy issue which I see as sort of connecting to this now is climate change. You know, this is really an urgent matter. And so in a way we have to start building new parts of the economy, new bits of the economy that will drive a transformation to a green economy. So in a sense, some of those jobs that are going now in, say, retail and so on, thinking about, okay, how do we redeploy those people into new kinds of industries, in new segments of the economy that we're going to need to deal with climate change. So we have to sort of, I think we have to think about this problem sort of holistically. And in a way, one serves the other. I mean, if that's a way of putting people back to work and creating new productive bits of the economy that we can then, which are then oriented towards moving to a carbon-free economy, then they're part of the same sort of policy drive, if you like.
Next question. Can you tell us, Niall, about conspicuous consumption and what it means?
Yeah, so this came from a fascinating thinker called Thorstein Veblen, who was sort of working sort of late 19th century during the Gilded Era of America. And what he was sort of saying was that that mathematical model of the economy that I was talking about, that talks about optimization, it basically says we're kind of like really powerful computers that are constantly, so we've got a set of preferences in our head, like I like Coke, but I don't like Lucozade quite so much, and I like hot dogs, and I'm basically calculating all the time, what can I do with my income to buy precisely the combination of goods that will satisfy me. He's sort of saying we're not really like that. We consume for reasons of social standing. So he makes the analogy with sort of traditional tribal societies where, you know, the chief might have certain trinkets or certain objects there because he's the chief, and they're there for reasons of social prestige. And actually that's why we buy stuff. It's not to do with these preferences, it's to do with kind of customs and tradition and wanting to show that you're at some level able to buy stuff. So how he applied that was to this idea. I think he came up with the term the leisure class. So this is during the Gilded Age of America. So there are all these people, they're buying all this stuff, these fur coats and top hats and lovely cars, essentially just to show people that they're rich and that they don't have to work. So they would actually buy, so for example, very impractical women's clothing is there simply to show that that woman doesn't have to work. She's, you know, married to a rich man, a tycoon, Cornelius Vanderbilt or whoever, and you know they don't have to sully themselves with labour. So it's all about social standing. So conspicuous consumption. Now, I mean, I think today we live in a very different, obviously, social setting. We don't quite. We're not wanting exactly to show that we don't work, but certainly when you think about brands and people buying certain goods, I mean, how much of that might be because of custom and peer pressure and all all those sorts of things. So this idea that we consume according to customs and traditions, I think is a very powerful sort of idea. It's still relevant.
So I just want to say to everybody, all of the participants on Facebook, here in Zoom, if you have a question, if you have a comment, just turn on your microphone. Niall is here to answer your questions, hear your comments, as are Niels Moose and Lino Rivera. They're here for that. So also you can write a chat. We're here to answer your questions and hear your comments. So Niall, going on to our last section, how can each of us become economists and why is it important? So this is Professor Rivera touched on this, that he's a musician, that he would like his students to become economists. But the question is really, okay, well, like from the beginning, we said, what does that mean? And what does that, if you're a musician, what does it mean to become an economist? Can you guide us a little bit on this process?
Well, I mean, in terms of why obviously we've talked a bit about, it deals with very, very big questions that are hugely important. We touched on some of those. I mean, I think to be an effective citizen in a complicated society, having some notion of what an economy is and what these economic questions are is really, really important. So if you think about how the complexity of governing and what states do, how that has burgeoned. So what governments do has become so much more complex than when the franchise was extended in the 19th century. There's such a range of policy problems that they're facing. So actually, I think to sort of exercise a vote rationally and effectively, I think having some notion of economics and what these debates are about is really, really important. So I mean, I think that actually it should start a lot younger than LINO students. I think it should probably start, at school, kids in high school, having sort of citizenship classes and thinking about what economics is, what politics is, and basically preparing them to cast their first vote. So that's why I think it's also important, leaving aside the fact that it deals with big questions, that the question of becoming an effective citizen.
So how is it, can you give us kind of a more practical example? How does that look then when you've got, like you said, because as you explained it, it sounds like a lifelong process of learning how to become a responsible citizen. How concretely would that help citizens making voting decisions, making decisions about whom to elect through economics? How does that look?
Well, for one thing, a lot of the popular debate and a lot of the things that politicians say about economics are fallacious and often based on very misleading but plausible sounding metaphors. So I mentioned one earlier, which was the household. So often this is a classic move by politicians on the right. Whenever a politician on the left, for example, the Green New Deal, how would you pay for it? We're just, what the government's doing is just like what a household does. You have to pay your bills at the end of each month and so on. It sounds very seductive and plausible, but actually it makes absolutely no sense economically. So being able to get underneath some of these little fallacies that almost become shibboleths, things that are just trotted out whenever a particular position is taken. I think that's partly what it could look like. It's actually, reading my book and other sort of introductory books. It doesn't take long to sort of get behind a fallacy like that. I don't think it's not complicated to see why that's problematic. And so things like that.
So you'd like to have informed citizens asking questions, asking tough questions, thinking about things and not leaving them up to others to think for them. You'd like them to be in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, democracy depends on it. A healthy democracy depends on that. If that stops happening, and it kind of is at the moment, I suppose, that's a real problem.
So last theme of the night, information economics. You talk about some great person like George Akerlof, an economist, talking about how in the 1970s, people who were buying a used car would pay a very low price because they actually didn't believe the car worked. Why?
Yeah.
Because if it worked, nobody would sell it. And so
Yeah.
this branches into today, into this idea about sovereign nations interfering in elections, about people being told to do this or that's dangerous, and all of this information in Google that you can look, and because it's written, it must be true, or because thousands of people like it or accept it to be true for some reason, because it's been viral, that it must be true. So tell us about going back to your experiences there in countries like the Palestinian territories, Ethiopia, and now in Britain today, in the United States. How do you see this working, and how do you see us? What is your antidote to this situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem of you know, so much cheap information that's easy to access through the internet, and a lot of that may not be particularly high quality information. And you know, we can get into fake news and all the problems of that, which have, you know, deeper sort of political, social underpinnings. But I mean, what's the antidote to it? It is trying to help people to access really good analysis and helping them to see what good analysis and good information looks like. And that, you know, that isn't an easy task when you're competing with Facebook feeds and so on, which are almost designed to be, you know, addictive, and provide a sort of an immediate return, an immediate sense of pleasure or whatever. That these are sort of highly addictive forms. How does a book compete with that? It's not easy. I mean, I don't really have an antidote to it, except to, you know, try to communicate these ideas as clearly and as relevantly to people as is possible. And, you know, I mean, I think there are kind of deeper sort of social and political problems underlying all this stuff. But from the point of view of specialists who are trying to communicate information, whether it's people writing about economics or medical people writing about COVID and vaccinations, just trying to really understand well, where your audience is coming from as well. Like, what do they want? What is worrying them? What do they know? What do they not know? So putting yourself in the shoes of that person, and then sort of crafting what you're trying to say in your message and the way that you use technical language and so on in a way that really connects to them. So, you know, it's dangerous being a specialist and just constantly speaking like you're a specialist, you know, using jargon and not really understanding where people are coming from and what the kind of compelling story is, what a compelling story is to your audience. I mean, coming back to the theme of storytelling again, it's part of it is telling really what is a good story and how do you tell a compelling story about this stuff, trying to understand that. It's often something that specialists and academics and economists don't do particularly well.
So Niall, so if I understand correctly, you're saying that if we want to get good information, if we want to decide or find good information, it's up to us to be informed. And so nobody can tell us this is good or this is bad. We have to use our own information to find that out.
Well, I think it's a sort of balance. I mean, you know, we've got this, I mean, coming back to what I said earlier about experts and economists, this sort of extreme attitude that sometimes it's disengagement and, well, this stuff is very complicated, leave it to them, they're the specialists. On the other side, well, I can look at stuff on Facebook, what do I need from an expert? It's understand, you know, you can't possibly as an individual, you can't directly verify every fact and every argument. I mean, you know, I don't know if it's a good analogy to talk about dealing with a medical person or an engineer. You learn, okay, is this person credible? Are they giving good sources of information? Where are they? How are they building their arguments without actually having to do it yourself? Because that would be impossible. And, you know, in a way, economics and economic policy is a bit like that, in that it is so complex. There's so many fields. An individual, even a professional economist, can't know about all of it. But it's about learning how to kind of evaluate information, understanding the credibility of sources. Is this a credible source? Is this a credible kind of argument kind of thing? It's that kind of skill. So it's sort of doing something a little bit in the middle. It's a sort of balance between trusting that expert, but also being a little bit critical towards, okay, where is the credibility coming from? And that's the balance really here.
So Niall, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the idea of trust, like you said, goes back to the very beginning of this information economics. Could you speak a little bit about that and also tell the story of George Akerlof receiving his Nobel Prize in 2001?
Right, okay. Well, I mean, so trust, you know, is one of those, when I was talking earlier about, you know, the proper markets and the way that economists abstract from society and create these very abstract models. I mean, one of the, I think, you know, sociologists, historians, political scientists understand that, you know, for markets to function, there has to be this broader context of trust. And actually Adam Smith was talking about that when he talked about the invisible hand. It wasn't this kind of disembedded sort of algorithm. It was this idea that you've got decent people who are kind of honest and, you know, have virtuous, good sort of, I don't know, good thrifty English men and English women, because that's what the context that he was writing in, who, you know, who don't lie to each other and that sort of thing. And it's within that context that actually the invisible hand works. So there are all these kind of social underpinnings to markets. Markets don't exist. They're not these sort of completely abstract, rarefied things. They exist within people and society and social norms, and trust being a really important element of that. So without trust, markets really don't function well, and that's what you get in societies that are starting to break down, you know.
And so would you say then it's by informing ourselves about economics, by becoming free-thinking individuals, that we can earn that trust?
So that's using trust in a slightly different context. I mean, I guess I was talking there about, you know, market exchange, depending on trust. And now, are you now talking about sort of the trust that you might have in an expert or in an advisor or in a...
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think, you know, this stuff connects to deeper problems with, I mean, you know, this bigger topic of you know, distrust of elites and of institutions and the institutions of liberal democracy. I think experts and economic advisors and all those policy people are all part of that sort of system of liberal institutions, which are now having a hard time and people are distrusting them. So I think you have to place it within that broader context of what are the political and social reasons for that. Just being, you know, a clear economist who writes nice stories and is clear about, you know, writes with clarity about the ideas is not going to be enough. I mean, it's a necessary condition, but there are these, I think, these bigger political problems at the moment that need to be addressed.
Understood. Let's take a look at the book and how we can buy the book from Yale University Press. So there it is. We are on Niall Kishtainy's website, niallkishtiny.com. All you have to do is go to latest book with a little explanation of it, a little history of economics, and you just have to go down to the bottom, buy the book. It brings you to Yale Books.
But also available from all the normal, all the usual booksellers. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's that easy.
Yeah.
Perfect. So there it is, everybody. Recommended to all of our participants to get it, to become informed economists. Good. So Niall, one last word then about the future. What's in store for you? What's in store for the world? How does economics look like in the year 2021?
Well, I mean, I think it needs to embrace diversity. I mean, you know, I think this is a theme that's come through in our discussion, that, you know, economics has been seen as quite a sort of monoculture in terms of its intellectual framework. And, you know, this is what I'm trying to do in the book, is to say there are many ways of thinking about this, and that you need to think about the broader social and political context of things. So I think that's going to be really important, and pushing things like the Green New Deal and dealing with climate change is really going to have to sort of understand those broader social impacts, because transforming an economy, essentially reducing some bits of the economy and creating new parts of the economy, has huge social impacts and political impacts. So if economists try and do that without understanding those social and political impacts, it won't work and it won't be sort of politically feasible. So having that broad context to it is going to be really, that's what I hope to see.
Understood. Thank you. So let's take a look at how to stay in touch with Niall Kishtainy. Our participants can reach out to you and ask you their questions.
They can. So you can click on the contact page. I've got an email. You can email me. That's probably the easiest way. I am on Twitter. I'm not a very prolific Twitter person, but you can certainly connect with me there, or drop me an email if you like to.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So there it is again, niallkishtainy.com. And you can contact him, you can buy the book, keep in touch with him, see what he's up to. So thank you very much, Niall. Thank you for this enlightening discussion. And we hope to speak with you again soon. And we really appreciate you sharing all of your story and your insight with us.
It was a pleasure, Simeon. Thank you.
So we have Juan Carlos Echeverri is here, straight from Colombia. Juan Carlos.
Hello, everybody. I'm here at the coffee plantation, but today I wanted to say hello, and I didn't want to talk about coffee itself. I wanted to just pay homage to the people who make all this possible, people who work here with a lot of dedication and passion. And so I prepared a little video that you can maybe play.
Let's take a look at it.
When we talk about a coffee farm, of course we have the coffee fields, but we also have the houses where people live. Those houses are very simple, but I find those houses very, very beautiful because of the flowers. So I wanted to talk today about that.
Hello, amigos of UR Music. Today, talking about coffee, I wanted to talk about a very important part in the coffee culture, which is the houses and the flowers in the houses. We are very lucky in this coffee farm because we have Cielo, who you are going to meet very soon. She takes care of these plants and she has a magic hand, as you can tell, because everything is full of flowers all year long. We live among all these beautiful plants full of colors, and that's thanks to her. So we're going to ask her what the secret is to keep all these plants so beautiful all year long. Okay, les presento a Cielo. Cielo es la maestra de las plantas.
I wanted to introduce you to Cielo. Heaven will be the translation. Cielo takes care of the plants and the flowers, and I'm asking her what her secret is. But she says that she has no secret, only lots of work and dedication. Passion would be the word. She chooses herself the earth, the soil where she's going to plant every flower. And she also changes the plants from places if the plants are not feeling comfortable. She also has a place where she brings the plants that are not feeling really well. So it's like a little hospital for plants. And she insists that it is just a lot of dedication and love, and you can tell. So I wanted to honor the work of these people living here and taking care not only of the coffee fields, but of the environment where they and we live. So cheers to Cielo and her family. Next week, we will meet the other members of the family.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Thank you, Cielo, and thank you to her family.
Yes, thank you. And you know, we have now the opportunity. I mean, you guys in Europe can have this coffee harvested with love and passion. So go ahead and try this coffee through your music.
Wonderful. Yes, and so again, maybe we can take a look at where people can buy it on the website. It's available in Europe and the United States for immediate delivery. It takes about 8 days to deliver and is 12 euros, 50 or 12, whatever that is in US dollars. There it is once again. Our shop. All you have to do is go down to Il Tenore Coffee by UR Music and Arts and click add to the cart. As many as you like, and then just go to checkout. Perfect.
Great.
Wonderful. So Juan Carlos, thank you again for stopping by from the beautiful coffee farm and for introducing us to Cielo and her family. Our heartfelt greetings to her and to you.
Thank you so much. Bye to everybody. Thank you for having me.
Bye, Juan Carlos. So
Bye.
let's take a look at, for next week, we have Julia Bushkova, violin runs in the family. Many of our featured guests pursued careers in music and the arts despite strong opposition from their families and or social networks. In other words, when, quote, two roads diverged in a wood, they, quote, took the one less traveled by. Julia Bushkova's example is quite different. Her entire family is made up of some of Russia's most elite professional violinists. The Shkitsmurtseva Bushkova family name, yes, that's what I said, resounds through the halls of Moscow's Tchaikovsky Conservatory of Music, where, as professors and performers, the family has formed and inspired generations of professional violinists. Today, in that very tradition, Julia continues her family's business at the University of North Texas, where her work focuses on nurturing students to become well-rounded, resilient problem solvers, as well as outstanding violinists. Since meeting a member of the Stradivarius family is out of the question, come meet Julia Bushkova and get to know what it's like when the violin is a family affair. So that's next week. Julia Bushkova, violin runs in the family. So once again, thank you to Niall. Thank you to Professor Lino Rivera, to Professor Niels Moos, to our superhero production team, and most of all, to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From Vienna, Austria, from London, England, from the Bay Area, California, and from the Echeverry Family Coffee Farm near the city of Pereira, Colombia, goodbye and see you next week.